Sometimes I make a video to help out you guys. Other times I say screw you guys and do something completely for myself. This is one of the latter cases. So today we're looking at an application called Gromit MPX. And as you can see from the screen, this allows us to annotate on the screen. This isn't just in this terminal window, that's just to make it a bit easier to see. This is going to exist anywhere on your system. This is incredibly useful for videos. So Gromit MPX stands for Graphics Over Miscellaneous Things Multi-Pointer Extension, and I'll get into what that multi-pointer extension means in just a bit. Now, what makes Gromit MPX so great is everything is done through hotkeys. So yes, there is going to be a thing in your system tray to go and like, oh, you want to have thicker lines, thinner lines, bigger opacity, all of that fun stuff. But the way that you're intended to use this is have everything keybound, so you don't have to go and mess around with stuff up here. You can just press stuff on your keyboard and then have your pen or your mouse in your other hand. So once you run Gromit MPX, the first thing you want to do is press the F9 key to actually toggle it. You'll know it's been toggled because your cursor changes from the regular cursor into a crosshair. Now, from this point, you can draw like you draw with any other drawing application by pressing the left mouse button or tapping down on your tablet screen. One thing you will notice is when you go and untoggle the application, the drawing is still going to be there. If you go to another screen, it's still going to be there and all of that fun stuff. So if you want to go and hide that instead of just untoggling the application, what you can do is press Control F9, and that will then go and toggle the visibility. So if you don't want to toggle the visibility, you'd much rather just clear it entirely. That can be done with Shift F9. Now, there's also an undo and a redo button, but they don't work the way you'd expect them to. So every single stroke is considered an action that can be undone. So this is a stroke, this is a stroke, this is a stroke. All of this is a stroke, basically from when the pen touches the tablet to when the pen is lifted, or when the left mouse button is pressed to when it is lifted, that is considered the stroke. Now, one thing that's weird, so when you press the F8 key, that's going to do the undo. It doesn't actually undo the way you'd expect it to. The stroke is still visible, and it's going to be visible until you perform another stroke. That is a bit of a weird behavior. I'd much rather prefer it to actually disappear when I press the F8 button and then reappear when I press Shift F8. Luckily, by default, there is still an eraser option that isn't clear the entire screen. So by default, bound to mouse button 2, which is your right mouse button, that is going to be your eraser. This can be changed though, so don't expect this to always be the case. The eraser does work, but for whatever reason, the radius is way larger than the cursor actually seems to be. One important thing to note is if you're using a compositor that has blur, make sure you disable the blur while using this application. Otherwise, this is going to happen. So the way this actually works is by putting a transparent window over your screen, and if you're making all transparent windows blur, obviously, this window is also going to be blurred. That can be disabled by just adding this application into the blur blacklist, but that's going to depend on which compositor you're actually using. Before we get into the configuration, I want to get into the MPX stuff. So there is a separate application called Gromit, which for the most part works basically the same as this. What it doesn't do, though, is make use of the multi-pointer X extension to allow for one input device to be in the application and one to be on the regular desktop. So for example, I could have my pen in the application, but then have the mouse still controlling my desktop. The way we set this up is actually really simple. The first thing we need to do is go and run X input --create -master, and then give it a name. The name doesn't matter, but let's just go with 2. And I don't know if it's being picked up by the recording, but I now have a second cursor visible on my screen. So what we need to do now is go run X input --list to see what input devices we actually have available. So this big list here is the one made by your system. This is the one that's controlling all your current devices. This is the one that we just currently made. firstly we need to find the device I want to move. So the device I want in the application is the pen. So the one we need to move over to the second device, that is going to be my mouse. So my mouse is the Logitech G305. I know there's a G600 there, but the main one I'm using is the G305. The ID of that is 9. Then we need to find the ID of its new master, that being this one here. So that has an ID of 18. So what we need to do here is xinput reattach, then the ID of the slave, that being 9, and then the ID of its new master, that being 18. So from this point, everything is going to work basically the same way on your system, but if we go and run the application, I can now draw with my pen, okay, and then I can go and move around my cursor at the same time and select stuff in the background. Now, like most changes in Xorg, this change is going to reset when you do a reboot, but if you want to go and change it back while you're still running, all you need to do is go and run xinput remove master, and then pass in the ID of the master, so that being 18. Now you're going to notice your mouse isn't actually working, whatever device you actually attached, because right now you actually have a floating slave. So what you need to do from this point is run xinput reattach the ID of the floating slaves, that being 9, and then reattach it to its original master, that being ID 2. And now everything is going to be working like it was before. Now, most of the control is inside of the application, but there is a launch option that does matter, that being the -O option. So this is for opacity. Opacity is not controlled by the individual brushes, which is really annoying. Also, make sure you have a compositor running, otherwise the opacity will not be working. So I've got mine running and it's going to be blurry, but ignore that fact. You might be able to see some of the text behind the screen there, but because of the blur, it's probably hard to make out. Now, for some reason which I don't particularly understand, Gromit MPX also has CLI Control. So right now, over on my second screen, I have Gromit MPX running. I can go and draw it and move to the other desktop, all of that fun stuff. But I could also go into this terminal here and then run Gromit-MPX-T to actually toggle it. When you would ever do this, I don't know. You can also go and clear, quit, redo, undo, all of that fun stuff, but I don't know when you would ever use that. Now, moving on to the configuration, as it should be, the file is located in the .config directory, and it's called gromit-mpx.cfg. Now, this file is pretty straightforward, but some of the things in here are a little bit weird. Firstly, hotkey and undo key, that being F9 and F8. So basically, the keys in this application are split up into two blocks, the F9 keys and the F8 keys. And you can't actually reassign things like undo and redo off to other buttons. So if you want to have it be like Control Y and Control Z, you can't do that. You can have it be Control, but you can't completely remap it. Why it's set up like that, I've got no idea, but at least all of the pen stuff can be rebound. As for the button names you use, that can be found with an application like XEV, for example, where when you press a button, it's going to tell you what that key is actually called, so it's fairly easy to work out. Now, the pen configuration is where it gets a little bit weird. So, basically, the pen names are going to be defined inside of quotation marks. Don't ask why there's a capital P for the pen here, that's just the way it was set up by default. The capitalization doesn't actually matter. What actually matters is what is on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Treat it like a function call in a language that has named arguments like, say, Python, for example. So we are calling the pen function and passing in the property size equals 5, which is obviously the size of the pen, and then color equals red. So for the other properties that exist, you have arrow size. Basically, arrow size lets you have a line that ends in an arrow. So let's go and add that one there. If I go and relaunch the application, so if I try to draw now, you'll notice if I use the green pen, at the end there is this big arrow. You also have the option to use min size and max size. I didn't mention this earlier, but when you are using a pen, it does support pen pressure, but when you're just using the regular size, it's going to calculate the min size and the max size for you. If you want to have an explicit min size and max size, you would use those properties instead. I believe when you're using a mouse, if you don't have a size and just have a max size and a min size, it'll go to the max size by default. And all 5 of these properties can be used at the exact same time. So min size, max size, color, and arrow size. Now, as for the color, there are predefined color names you can use, or instead of using that, you can pass in a hex value. So I could use something like, I don't know, 000000, which is white, or is it black? Someone in the comments correct me. Either way, you can use a hex value. What's really interesting here is when you define a new pen, you can actually define that pen in reference to another pen. So let's say you want your red, blue, and yellow pen to all have the exact same size, but the only different property is going to be the color. Well, what you can do is rather than using the pen function, now you can use the red pen function and just change that one property for this new pen. And erasers basically work in the exact same way, but rather than taking the pen function, they take the eraser function instead. I don't believe min size and max size are supported with the eraser. The only property it has is the size. And there's also a separate kind of tool called a recolor tool. So let's go and call this one recolor with the American spelling, because why not? And then the tool is going to also be called recolor. Now, this one only takes in one property as well, that being the color property. And what it's going to do is basically change the color of a stroke from one color into another. So let's make that color green, and then make sure you end the line with a semicolon. Now, even though we've defined all of these tools, none of them will be used until we actually assign them to buttons. Now, in this case, the first set of quotation marks, so these ones right here, is basically the input device that this pen is being assigned to. So default basically means the default input device created by your system. So that master device that has all of our devices in it before we actually go and move them. So you could actually go and say, I want this to be only assigned to the Logitech G305, or only assigned to the Wacom 1 by Wacom S Pen stylus, and that pen will only work with that input device. Now, when there is no key modifier in this chain, a key modifier being this value in the square brackets here, when you use mouse button 1, it's going to use this pen. So mouse button 1 with a tablet is going to be when you press down on the tablet screen, and then mouse button 1 with a mouse is going to be the left mouse button. But you could also have it so that when you press shift and also press down on the screen, it's going to use a different pen. Or if you press down mouse button 3 and press down on the screen, it's going to use a different pen again, this case being the eraser. And that's basically everything it can do. So if you want to install this and you're on Arch Linux, it is available in the AUR. If you are not on Arch Linux, it is available on FlatHub, or you just go and build it directly from the GitHub. You can expect to see this in future videos. This is an incredibly useful application, alongside things like, say, Screen Key, for example. So that's going to be pretty much it for me then. Let me know your thoughts on the application in the comment section down below. Is this something you'd actually use for yourself? Maybe you have a presentation coming up and you want to have somewhere to draw on the screen. Maybe this would be useful in your various Zoom calls you have to do for class. Or maybe this isn't useful to you whatsoever and you just want to see the video because you like to hear my voice for some reason. I would love to know. And if you like this video, remember to go and like the video. If you really like the video and you want to go and support the channel and become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon, subscribe to Only Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. I've got my podcast, Tech of a Tea, my gaming channel, Brodie Robertson Plays. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.